This is my LSAT Demon dashboard. This is what you all see when you log on to the site. My numbers are not normal because this is my teaching account. So this is not the account that I used when I was studying for the test, but I was an LSAT Demon Live subscriber. I studied with the Demon for 4 months and I went from a 155 to a 173. And all that info about all of our tutors and everything is on our website. If you check out, if you go down to the bottom, you can check out anything about the Demon tutors and the teachers. And we included our score increases sort of as a motivation sort of thing. Like we've all been in the shoes of someone who's studying, right? We all use the Demon and we all saw some great outcomes. And so we are eager to share with you all and help you as best we can. So this is your dashboard. You've got your numbers on there. Don't pay too much attention to the numbers. If you want to know what they mean, you can check out what it means here. It just helps you to have a little bit of extrinsic motivation, right? To see your numbers increasing. These numbers are compiled based on how quickly you're answering questions and or how much time it takes you to answer questions and drilling, what questions you're getting right, what questions you're getting wrong, right? And then with that, the AI of the Demon will give you questions. So we always say, all you need to do is come here and hit drill, and you're doing the right thing in terms of your studies, right? Down here is where you can take sections. So while you did just take a full practice test, we also encourage students to take practice tests over the course of sections. So not having to do it all at once. You can take a section a day, or you can do a section over the 3 sections over the course of a week, right? And then you can merge them. So if I had sections in my little section area, I would be able to click on the side of them. There's a little 3 dots thing, and you can merge them. So if you decided, hey, this week I'm going to work through test 45, I'm going to go through 3 sections, I'm going to merge it together at the end and see where I'm at. That's a great data point, right, for your studies. We also have our little test sections. This is where all your practice tests will show up. And that is helpful because you can see your numbers going up and down, or you can see where things are for you all. Again, we do not want you to obsess over your practice test scores. These are very limited data points, right? We don't want you taking practice tests every week. We don't think that's necessary, but we also don't want you obsessing over a data point that might be 1 of 5 practice tests that you take in your whole course of study, right? Over here, we have our classes. This is where you can find all the classes that are available each day at the Demon. We could have anywhere from 3 to 6 classes a day, all kinds of good stuff. You'll usually see them coded with what they are: logic games, reading comprehension, logical reasoning, and then many classes are mixtures of all 3. Like Wednesday class is a mixture of all 3 disciplines. Nathan's class is a mixture of all 3 disciplines as well. Down here, you'll find our LSAT Demon Daily podcast. Ben and Nathan host that podcast, as well as Thinking LSAT podcast. This is a good podcast if you're kind of in the thick of studying, if you're in the throes of applying. If you have questions, it's likely that they've touched on your topic, right? They've talked about veterans situations, older students, people who are having a career change, right? They cover subjects about scholarships and loan repayment programs. It sort of runs the gamut. So you can always find that day's episode here, but you can also find the podcasts anywhere that you get your podcast: Spotify, Apple Music, wherever. Again, here's the drilling. This is where you can sort of adjust your drilling settings. So if there are certain question types that you want to see, that kind of thing, we don't necessarily recommend that. Leaving it up to the Demon is really great because the AI will tell you what you need. This is where you can come to get a practice test, that kind of thing, time section, all that good stuff. And you can adjust your settings down here under test settings. If you want your tests if you want to save some tests for drilling later, if you want to save some tests for full testing, right? If I don't want to see test 93 or 92 show up in my drilling or sections, I might save them to take them as full test closer to my test date, right? You can move those over. You can do what you need to do in terms of lining that up the way you like. All right. Last thing I want to touch on is for live and premium subscribers, we also have all of our lessons, which are great. They kind of can give you a foundational look at what any questions that you might have. It's a good starting spot for a lot of people who are new to studying for the LSAT. But if you are like, man, I don't feel like I'm that good at ordering games, you can hit the lesson, you can work through a couple of games, you can watch live or you can watch recorded videos from classes or special events like boot camps. And you can get some techniques that will help you to work through those things and those things that you might be struggling with, right? Sufficient versus necessary, flaws. You'll see that these lessons are also linked in our explanations. So when you go to a question, let's say you're in prediction mode, which is awesome. Let's say we get the question wrong. The explanations will pop right up. And you can see that there are written explanations for most things. There are video explanations, especially for games, of course. There are diagram explanations. Sometimes there are memes. There are all kinds of things that can help you get to a higher level of understanding with in terms of explanations and doing blind review. So to the point of your test, if you just sat there and took the test and you got questions wrong, this is how you blind review, right? You go through, you look at the explanations, read the explanations, you watch the videos, you watch how someone else works through it. And then if it's still not clicking, I want to encourage you all to press that ask button, okay? We can ask a question. There's a team of tutors behind the ask button. If you're like, I still don't get it, even though I got it right. And if you have a question or a comment or a concern or anything, this is the way to reach us. We'll respond within 24 hours with an explanation as to what your question is and how we can help you get to that higher level of understanding. Okay. All right, let me check the chat for any questions that I have. And let's do a little Q&A. I saw this question. Can we assume that the last section is the experimental section? Shauna, I'm not sure which test you took, but the experimental section could be section 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's not always the last one. It's also not always the second one of that type. So for example, both times I took the official LSAT, I had 2 reading comprehension sections. Everyone say boo, because that stings. I got 2 reading comprehension sections. The first time, the first one was experimental. The second time, the second one was. There's no rhyme or reason, right? I had another question that said, real quick, what's the difference between score and accuracy? The columns that show up underneath the practice test score. I love this question. I adore this question. Let's get into it. So your score is your score. You go through a 23 question section, you get 18, right? Then your score is the 18 out of 23, right? Your accuracy is your attempted questions. So if you did not put an answer down because you ran out of time, or if you just bubbled in an answer, right? The demon can tell how much time you take on a question. So if you take like less than 3 seconds to answer the question, right? Then those points don't count towards your accuracy score. So we want to see your accuracy score very, very, very high, right? We want to see accuracy in the 90s, right? Because your accuracy score could be 95% for a LR section, and that could be you just getting, or 90% for an LR section, and that could just be you getting 9 out of the first 10 questions correct, right? But then you just bubbled in answers for the next 14 or whatever. Okay, so that's the difference between your score and your accuracy. And that's something that comes up a lot, right? Ben and Nathan always emphasize being very on top of your accuracy score as opposed to your score, because we're not worried about time at this stage. Any other questions that I can answer in the chat before we get into questions that are on the test? This is a quiet group today. All right, can I get some ideas of either LR, like whatever questions that you had that are pressing from the test? I'm hoping to keep this focus on test 73. I know that people took multiple different versions of the test. The game that I'll review is going to be from test 73. But if I could get an idea of what you all would like to hear or see me throw up on the board, that would be great. No preference. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna do one from LG. Is there a game that really got people, especially from test 73? Also, if you have questions about like anything, admissions, LSAT stuff, all that stuff, I'm here to answer. So this is just a general Q&A, and then we're gonna get into a test question. Questions about how the demon can help you would be great too. Okay, someone struggled with the third game, the one about the families owning buildings. Do I have people who also struggled with that game? All right, yeah, I'm seeing a couple people struggled with game 3. All right, how do we feel about doing that one first? Cool, let's do it. I'm gonna pull it up on my drilling. If you guys are ever looking for a game, you hit drill and then you hit search. If you're ever looking for anything, a game or whatever, you can hit drill and then search. I know that I'm not showing my screen anymore, but drill search, and then you'll get that pulled up pretty quickly. All right. So this is going to be test 73, game 3. How is my angle? Let's see. Oh, I pinned myself. I meant to spotlight myself. All right. I'm going to answer that question about study plans after I do this game, because now I'm in game mode. All right. Test 73, game 3. During the 17th century, 3 families, the Trents, the Williamses, the Yandells, they owned 5 buildings that constituted the center of their village: the forge, the granary, the inn, the mill, and the stable. Okay. The forge, the granary, the inn, the mill, and the stable. Cool. And then we see that each family owned at least one of the buildings, and each building was owned by exactly one of the families. So we have TWY and at least one. That's all I know right now. The historical evidence establishes the following about the ownership of the buildings. All right, so the W's owned more buildings than the Y's owned. How can that look, my friends? W owning more buildings than Y. What are the 2 ways that can look?
W can have 2 or 3.
2 or 3, right, exactly. And the thing that makes you say that, my friend that chimed in, is that since everyone needs to own one, for W to own more than Y, it could either be 2, 2, 1, or it could be 1, 3, 1. Isn't that right? Great. Yep. Perfect. Thank you for my volunteer. And then it says neither the inn nor the mill belong to the owner of the forge. So the inn and the forge don't go together. The mill and the forge don't go together. All right, all good info. And then it says either the Trents own the stable or the Yandells owned the inn, or both. And I love this rule because it gives us a great place to start making our splits. Here at the Demon, we do logic games with a technique called world building. So we make worlds, and worlds solve the game, so we don't have to think anymore when we get to the questions, right? So it says either T owns the stable or Y owns the inn, or both. So we either have T owning the stable. I'm going to split based on that rule. We have Y owning the inn. And when I split, I'm just copying down the exact world. I'm splitting based on that rule. So either the T owns the stable or I owns the inn, or both of those things are true, right? I and S are owned that way.
Marissa, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So as you're drawing out all these worlds, do you ever find like you have a threshold or a gauge where like, okay, I'm drawing way too many worlds here, like that there's a diminishing return where you're okay with drawing maybe 5 worlds, but then for the sake of time, you won't go past 6 or 7. Like, do you have some sort of rule of thumb?
I don't. Well, I mean, so worlds only capture what must be true. So sometimes I will stop myself if I find myself having more worlds than I would expect, maybe like 6, 7, whatever, and think to myself, am I only worried about what must be true? And I should only be worried about what must be true because worlds are just what must be true and we're splitting on a rule. So I have had games where I have made 9 worlds and that is perfectly fine with me because it meets both of those requirements that I just laid out, right? So I don't think that there's a diminishing return per se, especially because worlds tend to die, right? But I think there is something to be said for seeing everything as clearly as you can before making a decision about like what's more helpful or what's less helpful, especially when we're studying, right? I don't know if
Yeah,
that
that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. So does everyone see how I made this split? I have the worlds where S owns I have the worlds where T owns the stable, I have the worlds where Y owns the N, and I have the worlds where both. Now I do not have to worry about rule number 3 anymore. Rule number 3 is out of my brain. I don't care about it anymore. Okay. Now, and rule number 1 is out of my brain as well, right? So now we only need to worry about this rule here. So neither the inn nor the mill belong to the owner of the forge. So let me just take a second and point out that if we're in a world where S owns the stable and I doesn't own the mill, then, and Y doesn't own the mill, then I doesn't go here. So where is I forced to go? To W, right? So that's how I'm going to fill in the rest of these. We're in a world where where I is not owned by Y because we have that world down here. So I has to go to W. Let's make sure that that's it. And then same thing here. We're in a world where S is not owned by T. So S has to go here. Same thing here. If S is not here, then it has to be here. Okay? That should be it, right? We have all of the places that S and I could go. So that's filled in. Can everyone see this? Okay. So now we have to fill in the IF. We have S and I are off the board, right? We filled them in everywhere they can go. Now we have our IF, MF situation. So if we know that F cannot go with I and F cannot go with M, where can these variables go? Does anyone see it? I can also keep going. So if I is not with F, so F is not here, and if M and F aren't together, then M and F only have the option to be here and here, right? With G there. So these two are going back and forth, I believe. S. Let me just double check that. Let me keep moving on. Let me leave this one alone for a second because I think this is the most complex one. Here we have a situation where I can't go with F, so we know F has to be here. So that means M and G must be here. Does that make sense? All right. What about here? I can't go with F, that's already taken care of. M can't go with F, so we need to split M and F up. Doesn't matter where they go, so they're going back and forth, and then G fills in that last spot. Okay. Last one here. This is a problem, right? Can M and F go together? There are only a couple more spots here. This would be M, F, and G. Can M and F go together?
No.
No. So this world dies. All right. Let's go here. We have M and F can't go together. So we need to put them separately, going back and forth. And then we have G there. Same thing here. We only have 2 spots for M and F not to be together. Doesn't matter where. And then G is there. Okay, this one we're going to have to split. And I didn't leave myself a ton of room to do that. But we're going to split it down here. So when S is owned by the Trents and W is owned by the Williamses, or when I is owned by the Williamses, then we have to split. We have, the reason why we have to split is because I misspoke earlier. This I not being here means that I could be with the Williamses or I could be with the Trents. Does everyone see that? We could have SI here or we could have SI there. We just know that I doesn't go here because that's what we're splitting on. Okay? Are we following along so far? Cool. So with S and I, let's start with the ones where they're separate. With S and I separated, then we just know that F can't go here. So F has to go either here or here. So there are 2 splits we can make. I'll do the first split. F is here. And then I'm going to kind of try to squeeze in another world. Or F is here with S, right? If we have F over here, then it's just M and G going back and forth, right? Because with F underneath here, then we have M and G. We just need M and F and I and F can't go together. It doesn't matter where M and G go, so they can split. With this world, we just fill in M and G going back and forth, right? Down here is where it gets more interesting. We need M and F to be separated. I'm just going to put them on the top because it looks better. M and F need to be separated because they hate each other, going back and forth. And then we fill G in there. Okay? So that has taken care of all the variables in this game. Every single scenario is captured here on the board. This was one split apart. That's a split from there. But then we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other worlds that came out of that. Can everyone see that? Does everyone feel good about that? Sorry, it's a little tilted. Okay. So let's jump into the questions. Were there any questions about the way that I did that? Okay, so do we want to review the questions for this game, or was it mostly the setup that we struggled with?
Can we go through the entire game?
Yeah, for sure. So for question 14, it says, which one of the following could be an accurate matching of the family to the building or the buildings it owned? So for these questions, for list questions, we forget all the work that we just did on worlds, right? These are a good chance to check in with yourself to make sure that you read the rules correctly, right? We can answer list questions based on the rules. So another tip about answering list questions based on the rules is that if you are running out of time and you are just trying to get through to that last game, you can answer the first question. Usually when it is a list question, you can answer the first question, if it is a list question, just based on the rules, right? And I'll show you how. So the first one says, which of the following could be an accurate matching of each family to the building or buildings it owned? It says W owns more than Y. So we need to make sure we don't see any situation where Y has more buildings than W. That's how we're going to apply our first rule. In our first answer, they only have 1 and W has 2, so that's fine. Second, same in the second, same in the third. In D, it says that the Y's own 2 and W owns 1, so we have to get rid of that one. In the last one, they own the same amount of buildings, 2 and 2, so we have to get rid of that one as well. All right, Now we're on the second rule. Neither the inn nor the mill belong to the owner of the forge. So that is our no IF, no MF rule. So let's look for it. If we see IF or MF together, then we have to get rid of it. A is fine. There's no IF or MF. B is fine. There's no IF or MF. And then C, we have M and F together. So we have to get rid of C. So then we go to our last rule, and we're only between A and B. It says either the Trents own the stable or the Andals own the inn, or both. So we need S with T or I with Y, or both of those things. In A, we have S with T, and we have, and that's fine. That satisfies that rule. In B, we have S with W, and then we have F with Y. So we don't have either of those conditions satisfied. So B is out. So A is our answer. Does everyone see how you can use the rules to answer a list question?
Yes.
Great, fantastic. All right, question 15. Which of the following is a pair of buildings that cannot both have been owned by the Trents? So that means we never see in our worlds a situation where these two buildings are owned by the Trents. So we're not looking at these worlds right now because the Trents only own one building in these worlds. We're over here. And over here, we see lots of combinations: SI, SM, SF, MG, GF, SM, SG, right? So we have a lot of combinations. So let's go through the options. Who cannot have owned this? Or what can they have not owned, the Trents? So the forge and the granary, does that ever happen? F and G. It happens right here in this world. If F goes over here and M goes over here, then the forge and the granary are owned by the Trents. So that's not our answer. Question or B, the granary and the mill. G and M happens right here. If it's a can or cannot, thanks Eileen. It's a can or cannot, right? So if it happens once, then it has to be an option. So we get rid of B. The G and S, here that happens, right? We have G and S here. So that's fine. So we can't get rid of, or so we can get rid of that one. I and M. Does I and M ever happen?
No.
No. So we get rid of that one. I mean, so that's our answer, right? So that's the one that cannot happen. And then the last one is I and S. Right here. Right, so we've confirmed that our answer is that I and M never happen to be owned by T, right? And that's how worlds can show you, reveal the answer more quickly, right? If Y owns the mill, which of the following must be true? Y owns the mill, where does that happen? It can happen in this world, it can happen in this world, right? Switch those around, and Y owns the mill. Which of the following must be true? If Y owns the mill, I'm going to try to predict it. If Y owns the mill, it looks like S has to be owned by T because that happens in both situations. Let's see if that is in the answer. No, or the stable is not in the answer. So let's see. If Y owns the mill, then G has to be owned by W as well. Is that in the answers? Yeah, so answer choice D. G has to be owned by W if Y owns the mill. Cool?
Yes.
All right, next one. If one of the families owned both the granary and the inn, which of the following could be true? So someone owns G and I. That happens here, that happens here. I think that's actually the only two places that it happens. It happens here and there. So if one of the families owns both G and I, which could be true? Could T own the granary? No. That doesn't happen. It's always W. Could T own the mill? Yeah, that happens here. So that I believe would be our answer. Let's just double check. Could W own the forge? No and no. Could the Williamses own the stable? No and no. And then could the Yandles own the inn? No. So B is our answer. Last one. If the Trents owned exactly one of the buildings, which of the following is a complete and accurate list, any one of which could be the building that the Trents own? Let's look at it. If the Trents own one building, that happens over here. which ones can they own? They can own S, they can own M, and they can own F. That's it, S, M, and F. So we're looking for that in the answer choices, and E says that. So that's our one. All right. Does everyone feel comfortable with the way that I just went through that game?
It made sense once you had your like template, like your game, like on like what you have on your whiteboard set up. And so I want to know like what triggers you when you're reading the game of kind of setting it up the way that you did. Like how did you know to like make multiple worlds, where to like being comfortable with having almost 5 of them? Like how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 worlds.
Right.
I'm always comfortable with worlds. They are always like, I don't think that there is a hard cap on the amount of worlds that you can make, like I was saying before. When I read this game, I decided, and I said this out loud, but I don't know, like you choose to split on a rule. Okay, you always choose to split on a rule. What rule you split on is actually you can do the game based on splitting on really any rule, right? Usually, even to the extent that when we ask you all to redo games, like if you come across a game in drilling, or if you really struggled with the game, or if you blew through a game, whatever, we will tell you, approach it differently. Start at a different starting point. When I read this, the rule number 3 was the one that stuck out to me, right? Either the Trents own the stable or the Yandles own the inn, or both, because it's very concrete, right? Either this happens, or both of those things happen, right? So then I made those worlds where either that happened, or both of them happened. Same thing here. Either S happened, or I happened, or both of them happened, right? And from there, it was just about incorporating these other rule, right? The only other rule that was relevant at that point was rule number 2, because we'd already made our spaces for W to own more than Y. Okay.
Okay. And I have another follow-up question.
Hang on one sec. I'm just gonna bring it home. So in that situation, then we understood where I was forced to go, because it was either discussed in the rules or not. And then from there, we just filled it in based on the phobic characters, right? The people who hate each other and repel each other. That's how we filled in those last few. Okay? That makes sense?
That does.
Okay, cool. What's your question?
How did you know how to do the layout? So like the 3 and 2, like what triggered you to be able to know like that's how you should lay out your worlds?
So I just said there are 3 families and there are things that they own, right? And when you think about these things, you should think about them big picture. I would not assign things to people. I would not assign people to things. I would assign things to people, right? If you have, 6 different appetizers and you're like, oh, some people are vegan, some people are vegetarian, whatever, then you wouldn't be like, take the 6 appetizers and be like, these people can eat them or whatever. You would group them based on the overarching group is the person, the family that owns the thing, and then you're giving them things. So that's how I decided that TW and Y are going to be at the top. And then again, like I said, that first rule dictated that there were either 2, 2, 2, and 1, or 1, 3, and 1. That first rule that says W owns more than Y. There are 2 ways for W to own more than Y. Either it has 2 and Y has 1, or it has 3 and Y has 1, right? We know that everybody has to have something. So that's why T has to have 1 person. That's why 4 isn't an option, 4 and 1, right? 2 and 1 or 3 and 1. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Any other questions on that game? Okay, I'm going to answer this question really fast. Hopefully the person is still here. Any suggestions on study plans and practices for someone 4 months out from taking the official test, but also works full-time Monday through Friday? My friend, Alexandria, I was in this position. I worked full-time, and I was studying, and I had 4 months I didn't have 4 months to study. You should study as long as it takes for you to get the practice scores that you want to then sign up to take the test. that you want, right? But of course, we are human and we come up with our own timelines about things. So I was like, I want to take the whatever test. When I was getting closer in my studies, right, if I had been, and I'd been studying for a little bit, I focused more on time sections. I think time sections are great, especially when you have been studying for a while, because you will be in the -4, 5, 6, 7 range, as opposed to taking a time section and getting -20 and then feeling like now I have to sit here and blind review 20 questions, right? So when you get to a point where things are manageable and reviewing a section, taking and reviewing a section could happen within an hour, hour and a half, then that's great, right? So I would focus on time sections. Like I would wake up in the morning, do a time section at lunch. When I came home from work, do a time section, try to catch a class or two after work, and then drill at night, right? I think the most important thing, especially when you're getting closer to time, is hitting every discipline every day. The biggest mistake that I see, especially with my tutoring students, is sometimes a lot of the time that they come to me, they're coming to me because, oh, I used to be so great at logic games, and then I stopped doing them, and now I'm like at -11 again. And it's like, do everything all the time. You know, if you're training for a triathlon, this is what Ben always says. If you're training for a triathlon, you're not going to be like, oh, I got really good at swimming, so I'm just going to focus on biking for the next 4 months, right? Then what happens when you have to swim on race day? You don't know, right? So we need to keep everything sharp. Time sections, like I said, are a great thing. Drilling when you can. If you're on a lunch break, if you're walking around the building, if you're whatever, if you can pull out your phone and drill a couple LR questions. I loved to do that in the grocery store, drill an LR question, right? You're sitting in line, whatever, picking a kid up, picking a friend up, drilling on your phone, so just get it in where you can. And the time sections are going to be, I think, hopefully a game changer for you. And then you're honing in on the things that you struggle with. How did that sound, Alexandria? Cool. Yeah, no worries. Do I have more questions about studying, games, if you want to see another game, etc.?
Yeah, I have a question about just, studying for the LSAT in itself.
Yeah.
So I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, like you guys don't promote taking a lot of practice tests.
Correct.
So what's the thought process behind that? Like, what's the why?
The why behind that is similar to what I was saying about time sections. So it's like you sit there and take a 3-hour practice test, and then you're like brain dead, and then you're going to blind review it. Then you might have 25 questions to blind review. And that takes a very long time. And we want you to be blind reviewing immediately after you take the thing, right? So blind reviewing immediately after you take the section, blind reviewing immediately after you take the practice test, etc. The other thing about it is that they are not super helpful data points, right? You could get probably more out of drilling or time sections and really understanding what mistakes you made. And you don't need to know if you're still a 165 scorer 4 days from now, right? What those things matter when you're getting closer to your test date, right? Maybe a test every other week when you're 2 or 3 months out trying to decide if you should even sign up, right? But taking a full practice test, putting yourself through all that stress, etc., not wanting to blind review, we find that people don't really sit down and devote the time to blind review after they've sat there and taken the 3-hour test. So we want you to be studying the most efficient way that you can, because that matters more than being able to walk out the door and say, okay, I got a 163, and it doesn't mean anything,
Got it. And if you're someone who's just starting, who needs like base knowledge of how to tackle the LSAT, so even understanding how to even begin building game boards, is that where the lesson portion of LSAT Demon comes into play? Like, where do you get the foundational information from?
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so the foundational information can come from the lessons, but we also believe that there are things inherent to, like, if you are a person who went to college and now wants to go to law school. You are a reasonable person that can like reason through things, especially on like you understand how to read things for comprehension. You understand how to reason through a concern or scenario, whatever. So we want people to not mystify the whole process, right? We want you to really focus in on what you already know to be true. So I personally didn't really go through the lessons until I had an issue, right? You don't need to start at the lessons and be like, all right, I'm going to do every lesson before I start drilling. Ben always says, and Ben and Nathan always say, everyone here says, the best thing that you can do to study for the LSAT is do an LSAT question, right? Do an LSAT question. That will give you more information about yourself. Do I understand sufficient versus necessary? If you do, fantastic. Don't mess with it, right? If you do not, go to the lesson, figure it out, right? People understand things. People understand causality. These are flaws that you've seen throughout your life in science class, in these kinds of things. We know that there are things that are true about people that they already know that they're bringing into the test. And we don't want to try to deconstruct that in any way and build you back up. Capitalize on those things, right? And then go to the lessons when you have a problem. Does that make sense?
That does. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, no worries. Gabriella.
Hi, back to like the full-time, like working full-time and studying. I was just wondering, what you said before was helpful, but what I've been struggling with for a while has been like consistency, not just with full-time work, but with like family and stuff like that getting in the way. So I was just wondering if you have any other like tips and advice for something like that.
Yeah, and one of my tips would be probably to talk to someone who has been through that in Brandon. Brandon is a tutor teacher at the LSAT Demon. Everybody's happy to answer your questions via email. Our emails are just our first names at lsatdemon.com. So if you look up Brandon on the page, he has a little kid, he has a wife, he has a business, right? He's been through it, and I've talked to him about those kinds of things. And so if you want to hear it from horse's mouth, I would recommend reaching out to him. But from my limited perspective in terms of like I have a dog, but like I don't have a kid, so I don't really know what exactly it's like. I mean, I think consistency is huge, right? Devoting your time, like scheduling your time so that it's built in, so it's not an easy thing to skip, is huge. And also just like conveying the importance. I think something that was big for me among my friends, significant other, family, etc., was like, hey, I'm doing this thing because it could save me $250,000, right? Like I'm not going to dinner. I'm not going to the out of town cousins thing, whatever, because I'm trying to save myself $250,000, right? Thanks, Jasmine. So I think like just sharing a little bit more about what the reality of 4 or 5 more LSAT points means. It's life-changing information. Obviously, I don't know if you're like, I don't know that that's like a salient argument to be made with a child who needs your attention, but like consistency, scheduling things in, and then bringing other folks into your journey, into your why, into your sort of reality can be really helpful, because I mean, oftentimes people don't really know what all of this means and how much impact this can have on your life, right? I don't know if that was helpful, but maybe reach out to Brandon.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Do you have like, I know like what you shared before about like training all 3 sections and just using time sections, but are there any like other like tips that helped you out with managing your schedule and studying really well?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So one thing that is I always think is important, and I don't know what like level of subscription you have, if any, but so like we don't factor class time into our schedule. So when we say 1 hour LSAT, whatever, it doesn't include class time. One thing that was important to me, and that a friend, a now colleague, told me here at LSAT Demon was like, if you only have X amount of time, then do what a class does, right? So like a class that drills all 3 disciplines does 5 LR questions, 1 game, and 1 reading comprehension passage. If you sit there and understand all of those things, then you can count that as your 1 hour LSAT for that day, and you will see progress, right? So that, I mean, that would be my main recommendation. If you're like, I don't have time, or like whatever, like I think that, or in terms of the sort of like going across all 3 sections, 5 LR questions, 3 LR questions, a game, a reading comprehension passage is like a perfect study session in my book.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, no worries. Other questions? How do you review RC? Okay. So the first thing I would say is like blind review, right? So you get a question wrong, you don't know the answer, you go back, you think it through, you answer it again. Hopefully you get it right. Let me just pull this up. So that's what we call blind review. When you get a question wrong, you answer it again. This will be my first reading comp passage, apparently. Okay, so let's say we go through this whole thing and we're getting things wrong. Okay, so you know which ones you got wrong. You don't know what was wrong with them necessarily, right? So it just gives me this question again that I just got wrong. So what would I do? I would, first of all, I do not ever answer a question on reading comprehension until I have understood exactly what I read. And like that might seem like overkill, just like sometimes world seems like overkill to people. But the payoff when you get to the questions and you do the questions in 45 seconds and you spent 8 minutes setting up the worlds or reading the passage or whatever is astronomical, right? This payoff is incredible. So I read the passage, I understood every single word, but I still got one wrong. I answer it again. If I get it wrong again, then I got it right. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. But if I got it wrong again, then the explanation thing would pop up, right? You can read the written explanation or you can watch the video. And the other thing about like when you are starting out studying RC that I want to emphasize is that there are story time videos for the vast majority of the passage where a tutor or teacher, so Ben, Nathan, Rebecca, whoever, Allah, will read the passage the way that we are trying to encourage you all to read the passage, right? Slowly, digesting every word, focus, even if we don't think we understand the topic, trying to reach that higher level of understanding of the words that we just read, relating it back to our lives, etc. So you can watch that video if you think you may have not understood the passage, whatever. And then again, if you get the question wrong, going here and watching the explanation video, reading the explanation, and then hitting the ask button if you have a question about that. So that is legitimately how I review RC. It's not like a, here's everything that Demon has to offer. That's like a legitimate way that RC review should go for you. But and the other thing that I want to say about like review and LSAT questions, that kind of thing, it is also okay to move on, right? If you're sitting there and it's 11 p.m. and you cannot get it through your head what's going on, go to sleep, look at it in the morning. If you tried your best and you still don't understand exactly what's happening, but you have a passing understanding of what's going on, move on to the next passage and see what you see, right? The LSAT is a test of skill, not a test of knowledge. So not understanding one thing doesn't mean that, not understanding one question, answering a question wrong, does not mean that you have not started to build the skills to understand the test, right? So I think the biggest thing that makes me worried about folks is when they sit there and stare at a question for hours and hours and hours and they're unrelentingly stuck on it. I'm like, move on. There are thousands of LSAT questions, right? There are 90 something tests. If it comes up again, then we will talk about it again, but don't be so hard on yourself. Hopefully that answers your question, Carla. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Is it Sajay?
Oh, you got it right. Yes.
Oh, heck yeah. Awesome. No, Sajay, we do not diagram. We don't believe in it, partially because of, I think it was you that asked the question earlier, partially because of what I said, right? We believe that you are a reasonable person able to reason things out. If you're diagramming things, you're making it harder than it needs to be when you can understand if this thing's happening, then this thing's happening. The first thing didn't happen, then what happens, you know?
Yeah, sometimes I find it hard to remember and like everything.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes understanding the flow of the conversation. Like, okay, wait a minute, how did we get here?
Yeah. So I mean, part of it I think is also slowing down, right? So, and also looking for the connection, right? And if it's not doing it for you the way that they wrote it, then put it in your own words, right? If I've been going back and forth with a student on the ask button about this question about eagles, it's like, or it was like hawks and birds of prey or something. So like they were trying to say that because birds of prey don't usually hunt in packs, therefore because hawks are birds of prey, then we wouldn't expect them to hunt in packs, whatever. So there's some flaw there that the student was very hung up on. And I'm like, just take it back to where we can, like, take it back to the starting point. What are they saying about hawks, right? Like if you need to write it down, I don't recommend it, right? Like I can't recommend writing things down on LR. But if you're like, I need to make a little heading that says like, here's everything we know about hawks, right? Bird of prey, doesn't usually hunt in packs, whatever. I'm not against that, but I think learning how to diagram for the sake of getting better on LR is a waste of time. Okay, Tanya, does that answer your question, Sajay?
It does.
Cool. Tanya says, I struggle with what I've read too, even if I slow it down. Yeah, and here's the thing, like I studied with Demon Live. I got a lot out of the classes because I think I got the attitude that teachers take towards a passage, right? If you watch the storytime video of whatever passage was on this test that you were struggling with, I bet you that you'll come away with a better understanding, right? You read a sentence, pause, I need to understand this, right? Read the next sentence. Can I predict where this is going based on what I just read before I even read the next sentence, right? That's huge because that shows a higher level of understanding. And that is honestly lawyering, right? I was reading for a contracts class. It's like, I need to be able to predict what the other side's arguing so I can make my argument back, right? That's what we're going to be dealing with when we're in law school, right? So Tanya, my advice to you is just do not give up, right? Slow down. Slowing down it's not helpful. Push yourself to a higher level of understanding, right? Do I understand what I just read? Do I understand how that connects to the next sentence? Can I draw a parallel between what it's saying in my own life, right? Take an easy passage and read it in that style, right? Watch a video and then practice reading it in that style to yourself, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions about this?
No, can you do a reading comp like from the exam?
Sure, I can do, yeah, I probably have like 10 more minutes in me, but I'll do a, let's see, a test. What test did you take?
73.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Test 73. What was the most interesting passage?
None of them.
Come on, that's the other thing, y'all. You gotta learn to love this shit. I'm not kidding you. Like, it sucks. It's a means to an end. But if you can really get yourself to be like, "Woo, I love art history." Like, you just gotta do it. You know. What do you have a choice, or should I just choose one
You can
passage?
choose one. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's see. All right. Why don't we do the first one? Cool. And it's a science passage, which is something that I usually don't love. I'm also gonna sit down because I've been standing for 1 hour and I don't have the stamina I used to. All right. So passage 1 on test 73, I'm gonna share my screen. It says, Charles Darwin objected to all attempts to reduce his theory of evolution to its doctrine of natural selection. Okay. This guy, Charles Darwin, hates it when everyone tries to reduce this broad theory of evolution down to just natural selection. I'm on board with that, right? Like, he's like, I spent all this time, I thought about all these things about evolution, whatever, and now all we talk about is natural selection. That sucks, right? All right, so I'm on board. He says, I'm assuming he says, natural selection has been the main, but not the exclusive means of modification. So he's like, there are other things going on and you people are not paying attention to it. You're reducing it to natural selection. There's a lot of other stuff going on, right? That's what he's saying. Nonetheless, a group of self-proclaimed strict constructionist Darwinians, so some of his weird followers have declared themselves strict constructionist Darwinians, and they have recently risen to prominence by reducing Darwin's theory in just this way, which is interesting, right? If they are strict constructionist Darwinians, we would expect, similarly to how strict interpretists, like constitutional interpretists on the Supreme Court, are very adamant about keeping these things pure, keeping it down to what the writers intended. These people seem to toss out what Darwin said, which is surprising because they're strict Darwinians, strict constructionist Darwinians, but they reduce his theory to natural selection just as he objects to, which is kind of nuts. So I want to see where this is going, right? Is everyone catching on to the way that we're interacting with this passage?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Okay. He goes on to say, these theorists use the mechanism of natural selection to explain all biological phenomena. Shocking, right? They're really reducing this down to natural selection. They assert that natural selection is responsible for every aspect of every species, form, and behavior, and for the success or failure of species in general. That is nuts, right? That's crazy. That's not what we would expect from these people, especially because Darwin himself is like, it is not just about natural selection. And they're like, we're the strict Darwinians, but we think it's all about natural selection, right? So Darwin's flipping over in his grave. Let's keep going. Natural selection is generally held to result in adaptation. What is adaptation? What do I know about adaptation? Adaptive, changing, right? That's our root word. We're changing and responding to stimuli and adapting to our environment. I am a naturally cold person and I need to adapt to this new freezing cold climate, whatever. Maybe my ancestors will have thicker skin, whatever. Adaptation. That's what I know about adaptation. It goes on to give us a definition: the shaping of an organism's form and behavior in response to environmental conditions that achieve enhanced reproductive success. Makes sense, right? How do we change in response to an environmental stimulus in order to continue the line, right? Continue our reproductive success. If the strict constructionists are right, or if they're right about the fact that natural selection is the be all end all of this situation, the persistence of every attribute and the survival of every species are due to such adaptation. So if these people are right, every single thing every attribute that people have or animals have or species have or whatever, and their survival are due to such adaptation. So we've adapted to not be covered in hair, right? That means that is due to our natural selection, right? That is an advantage that somehow we learned was an advantage. And so we adapted to that being our reality. Then it says, but in fact, so I should pause, right? Because but is a little twisty turny, right? We need to understand what they're going to say in response to this. It says, but in fact, so I'm assuming that they're going to push back on this idea that every attribute and every species survival is due to adaptation based on natural selection. I'm expecting a pushback here. It says, but in fact, nature provides numerous examples of attributes that are not adaptations for reproductive success and of species whose success or failure had little to do with their adaptations. Okay. So who's wrong here? The strict Darwinians are saying every adaptation, every attribute, all the survival is due to this thing. But then we turn to nature, which is what's actually happening, and we see that there are tons of attributes and tons of like successful or failed species who did not succeed or fail based on those adaptations. So what's going on, right? They go on to say that, for example, while it is true that some random mutations of genetic material produce attributes that enhance reproductive success and are thus favored by natural selection. So that's very wordy, and I want to slow down, right? So the author is giving a concession, right? While it is true that some random mutations produce attributes that enhance reproductive success and are favored by natural selection. So he says some, right? It's true that others also produce harmful attributes and are weeded out, which is something that we know from population genetics, that most mutations, and then it says, we now know from population genetics that most mutations fall into neither category. So they're saying there's something to be considered about this, right? That there might be an advantage or a disadvantage that comes with an adaptation, but sometimes they are neither, they're neutral, right? Which makes sense, right? Maybe it's completely neutral that humans have adapted to not have hair on our knuckles, right? For most of us, I guess. I don't know about your dads or grandpas or whatever, but like maybe that's a neutral mutation, right? Or a neutral adaptation. So, all right. Research has revealed that neutral, and they use that word, right? They use the word neutral, which is what what active reading, how it benefits you, right? I'm thinking ahead and they're telling me what I'm thinking, right? Research has revealed that neutral, non-adaptive changes account to a large extent for the evolution of DNA. That's so interesting, right? DNA evolves, but based on neutral things. That's fine. But that kind of goes against what the strict Darwinians are saying, and it goes against this idea of natural selection, right? That every change is based on an advantageous or disadvantageous situation or outcome is not necessarily true. They can be neutral, right? And that neutrality has actually accounted for the evolution of DNA, which is somewhat surprising, right? It says most substitutions of one unit of DNA for another within a population have no effect on reproductive success. All right, we switch a T with a N. I haven't been in science classes in years. You switch one of those letters with another letter, no effect on reproductive success. Their alterations often change the attributes of a species, but their persistence from one generation to the next is not explainable by natural selection. All right, exactly. We evolved to have eyebrows. Does not mean that if we did not have eyebrows, that our kin and their kin, etc., would die out, right? It is just a neutral thing that happened. Maybe one substitution of DNA. I don't know how it works, but I'm just spitballing here. Last paragraph says, additionally, the study of mass extinctions in paleontology, cool, dinosaurs, right? Yeah. The study of mass extinctions in paleontology has undermined the strict constructionist claim that natural selection can account for every species' success or failure. Yeah, that makes sense, right? That makes a lot of sense, actually, because we have mass extinctions, and then it's like, oh, but the best ones survive, but then it's like, no, actually everybody died. That's what a mass extinction is, right? So natural selection is clearly not at play here if that's what's happening. It says the extinction of dinosaurs some 65 million years ago was probably caused by the impact of an extraterrestrial body. All right, now we're getting into the good stuff, talking about meteors. I hope everybody's seen that TikTok or whatever it was. That's like the angel God was like, I told you to make them meteor. And it's like, you said to send a meteor. Hopefully everybody knows what I'm talking about. Otherwise I sound insane. Anyway, it says, we have this impact of an extraterrestrial body. Smaller animal species are generally better able to survive the catastrophic changes in climate that we'd expect to follow from such an impact, which makes sense, right? The dinosaurs were lost, but we would expect that smaller animal species would be better able to survive the climate changes, right? We know that this, I believe, caused the ice age or something, like the clouds that went up blocked the sun and then whatever. And it says, and mammals in the Cretaceous period were quite small because they could not compete on the large scale of the dominant dinosaurs. Okay, so we expect smaller animals to survive, and we had a lot of small animals because the dinos were big. But what this scenario explains, while this scenario explains why the dinosaurs died off and mammals fared very well, it does not conform to the strict constructionist view of the adaptive reasons for the success of species. Okay, this scenario explains why dinosaurs died off and mammals fared well, but it does not conform to the strict constructionist view of the adaptive reasons for the success of species, right? So it does not tell us about natural selection. It doesn't tell us that it's not an endorsement of natural selection to say that some things survived a meteor attack and some did not, right? That's not a resounding endorsement of this theory.
So would you say that the author or this passage is really going against these constructive Darwinism, these crazed fans' perspective?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like the even from the beginning when he was talking about the when he said surprisingly, right, or something. Nonetheless, a group of this one here, by reducing Darwin's theory in just this way, I can hear the author's voice, right, a little bit saying that I'm pushing back on this idea that these theorists are correct, right? I'm pushing back on their interpretation of strict Darwinianism, given the set of facts that we have, that Darwin did not like this description, and that this whole example that we've been building to this last sentence, right? Sound good?
Couldn't
Okay.
get off mute fast enough. Yes, that sounds good.
Okay, sweet. So then, all right, our last sentence says, for that view, the view that the view of natural selection, that would assume that these adaptations are a response to conditions that are already in place at the time the adaptations occur. So that makes perfect sense. They're kind of concerned about how natural selection doesn't explain how these animals survived a meteor attack. Why? Because the meteor attack was a novel condition, right? It's not like, oh, the earth is gradually getting like hotter or colder or something. It's like, no, a meteor came in, knocked out everything. We've got an ice age now and whatever, but still we see these adaptive responses. Still we see these mammals survive. And mammals could not have adapted in advance to their conditions caused by impact. That's what I just said. In a sense, their success was the result of dumb luck. So the author offers us at the very end an alternative explanation and an undermining explanation of natural selection accounting for all the success or all the failures of all of the species over time, right? So yeah, this author's not on board with the strict Darwinians, for sure. Was that helpful? Did we see how we should be reading through these things?
This was extremely helpful because that
That's
was not
awesome.
how I was reading any of
Okay, yeah, totally. And I will tell you, and Rebecca is like the queen of reading, and Ala too. There are two instructors at LSAT Demon. I have learned from the best. They are amazing at helping. And honestly, we have this joke that we, whatever, and it's funny, but it's also very real. It's like the LSAT humbles you because you don't realize that you did not know how to read. And I didn't realize I didn't know how to read until I got here, right? Yeah. So that's how we're trying to do it. All right, team. Feeling good?
Feeling good.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for asking questions. I think that this was really productive. And if you guys have any questions about the demon, like I said, you can email help. You can email any of us. You can hit the ask button, whatever. But yeah, you can review the session. I'll see you all in class if you choose to join. So see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.